Perfect. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being able to join. Somya, or go by Somi for short, and really excited to talk a little bit about kind of since graduating, since being in Phi Rho, where engineering has taken me, and specifically how it's really benefited me as I've stepped more into the fashion industry. So, starting with just a very high level about me before diving in. So, Somi, as I mentioned, I go by Somi for short. I've lived in a lot of different big cities, but as of right now, I'm living in beautiful sunny Los Angeles. And when I was in Phi Rho, I was in the ADA chapter as well, as we have a couple of the gals on the call from ADA, has studied industrial engineering at the University of Michigan before I had the opportunity to work for a variety of different really amazing Fortune 500 companies. In my spare time, I like to stay active. I love running Spartan races, different kind of races in general. I have always had an enjoyment for fashion and using fashion as a self-expression, and always loved attending different kind of fashion events. As you can see here, I'm at an art opening on the red carpet. And in the bottom picture here, it's just kind of love spending time with friends, family, getting some fresh air. This is at a day party event where I'm dancing and just being able to spend time with my loved ones. And so currently I do work at Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and I'm at school at Parsons School of Design. And I'm also a designer. We'll talk more about that. I launched my own fashion label last year. And so all these things we'll talk a little bit more about, but this is a really good summary of kind of the things I enjoy in life, how the different directions my career has taken me and where I am today. And so really that's what I want to talk about, is how does someone who's an engineer working at Facebook, working in big tech, how do they end up on the runway at New York Fashion Week, which is where I had an opportunity last fall to launch my label and showcase my first collection. And so that's really kind of the journey I will be taking y'all through. So rewinding, taking it all the way back to college days. This was 11 years ago, so I graduated in 2016, but these are a few pictures with my class, my sorority sisters back at Michigan. This is really the first time in my life where I realized what it can mean to have strong, ambitious, resilient women who are part of your support system. And many of the faces you see here today, and even some of the faces on the call today, are women who I met them a decade ago, and they're still part of I'm very lucky to have them as part of my support system even until this day. And so I know a few of the gals on the call, you mentioned you've graduated recently. I'm sure you can maybe say the same, that you have women who you've graduated alongside, and I'm excited to know these women 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and they have really been the fire behind a lot of what I've done since graduating. And so when I graduated, this is me on my first day of work as a big kid. This is me going to work as a consultant. I started my career after graduating in 2016 as a consultant for PwC. I spent about 2.5, 3 years doing manufacturing and supply chain consulting. I really enjoyed the more kind of rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty side of industrial engineering. And this concept of taking raw materials, transforming it, and making something new. And so this is the first time in my life where I really started developing and refining my PM, or my program management, product management skills, learning what it means to work in the corporate world. And this was my first dive into my big kid job. From there, in 2018, I decided to make the jump to tech. So when I was at PwC, my background was more in the retail space, doing consulting for supply chain companies, or as a supply chain consultant. And then when I went to Meta, this was my first venture into tech, and I joined the company as a supply chain program manager, focusing more on the data science space. Since then, I have built out a small team in the biz ops and portfolio management space. And most recently, I've transitioned to product, focusing on internal financial management products. So not exactly where I thought my career would take me. Definitely never thought I would end up in the finance space. But even my career between consulting and Meta has been a really cool journey, and something that I found a lot of fulfillment with. In 2022, In 2022, I decided to go back to school, but I didn't decide to go back to school for an MBA, which is, I think, what a lot of people, my friends and family, expected that, oh, you've done the consulting thing, the big tech thing, you're probably just going to go back and get your MBA, which it would have been a really great career path, but it just wasn't resonating and speaking to me specifically. And 2022 was a little bit of a tough year for me in my personal life, and I just needed something that was an outlet for personal fulfillment. And so I was searching for something, didn't know what that meant, and I kind of randomly came across this fashion design and fashion business program at Parsons. And I still remember the first time I found this program. I'm reading it, and kind of thinking that, wow, this is so cool. But man, I'm an engineer. I work in big tech. There's no way someone like me, this is for people who are on the creative side of the industry. And so I kind of clicked away. But for weeks and weeks after that, I kept finding myself coming back to this program, reading the webpage again and again. And I didn't share this with anyone. I didn't ask for anyone's advice as I might normally do with big life decisions. All I knew is that I wanted to be part of this program so badly. I know it didn't make sense that, oh, an engineer, she's going to do fashion design. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't ask for anyone's feedback. I just got the paperwork. I enrolled. I said, if somebody puts a little voice in my head, I might not take the plunge and do it. I need to do this for myself. And so only once I had my class schedule in hand did I tell my parents, my friends, my family that, hey, so I'm going back to school for fashion. And I got a range of responses, reactions, and some people were excited for me. Everyone was supportive. Not everyone understood, but all I knew was that something in my gut was telling me that just do the thing. Just do the thing, as crazy and as it sounds. And so basically overnight, I went from doing a big tech day job to now doing all kinds of fashion homework. So kind of looking at some of the images here on the screen, all of a sudden I had spent 4 years in school doing engineering homework and problem sets and math. And now my classes were comprised of things like learning how to sketch the female form and depict garments on it. I was suddenly putting papers together, not on technical topics, but comparing cultural icons with couture brands. I was learning how to direct a photo shoot and tell a story. I was learning color theory and how did I apply that to garments and how to tell a story through colors and evoke different emotions. I was learning how to leverage Adobe Illustrator to do fashion flats mock-ups like these Balmain shoes to the right side here of demonstrating to manufacturers how do I want a garment to look, the colors to lay, what kind of cords do I want on there, different accents. And so this was the first time where I realized that even though this was all fashion homework, fashion classes, that my background in engineering and tech was actually kind of helping me out. That fashion required a lot of precision and attention to detail, which is something that being in tech or being a PM and even being in engineering, that is a skill set which is required. And so this was something which I knew as I dove further into my classes that I kind of found that thing that I was itching for, that left brain, right brain, that I did all my technical work for my day job, but now I had this really cool outlet to take a break from work occasionally, log on 2 nights and weekends. And it was a crazy juggling game, but it was something that finally was bringing me that personal fulfillment that I needed. The next time I realized how much engineering would help me was when I began doing my garment construction courses. I did not know how to sew before I started school. I didn't even know how to turn on a sewing machine. I bought my first sewing machine. I had to Google how to turn it on and set it all up. But as I began diving into my garment construction classes, I realized that, engineering actually is more helpful here than I realized. So before diving into what's on the screen, when I began thinking about if I was to construct garments, I knew that I wanted to do something over the top, avant-garde, artistic, that I really do still love my day job, that if I was going to do something in fashion, it needed to be the cherry on top, something special. And so kind of talking to what's on the screen here, starting from left to right, a lot of the components of designing a garment include engineering in them. It's essentially designing a product, manufacturing a product. So on the left here, you can see a skirt taped out that I was working on and kind of designing. The second image here, for those of you who might have seen any fashion shows like Project Runway or some of the ones that are on Netflix these days, is a muslin draping before the final cloth is used to cut a garment. The third image is a pattern being drafted before actually cutting it out with the final cloth and sewing it together, which you see here on the right. And so with all of these steps, I again realized that precision and attention to detail and even drafting the pattern, that all the measurements down to a millimeter, if they're a little bit off here, a little bit off there, it can impact the final quality of the garment. And so I realized that, again, I would have figured it out hadn't I done engineering, but having that background, knowing how to build a product, do these kind of calculations, really focusing on that precision, made it a lot easier and kind of the runway a little bit shorter in making these kind of high quality over the top garments. The next time that I realized engineering would help me in fashion design is when I began my virtual fashion design classes. So as you can see here, these are 3 designs that I've made myself in a software called Clothes 3D. The first time I took a class doing virtual fashion design and I had to download the software, I realized that this was not really any different than a modeling or a CAD software that I'd used in engineering. That, yeah, instead of designing machinery, I was designing clothes, but the software worked in exactly the same way, that I was inputting things like the texture or the weight of a textile, how stiff it was, and being able to assemble all the different pieces of a garment, being able to see the model virtually walk in it, move in it, see how it flowed on her. And instead of maybe seeing, I don't know, water flowing through a pipe virtually and kind of assessing the pressure, I was doing the same, but for clothing. And so looking at the screen a little bit here, so these are all designs that I've created myself, and the smaller image you can see in the middle. So this is a deconstructed pattern of the garment on the left that I had designed in Clothes 3D. And so I was able to test things like the garment to the right side, you can see this yellow top is made of lace, but then I've used a certain type of stiff canvas for the bottom of the white skirt because I wanted it to really hold its shape and kind of have this nice flow to it. But the original design I did, the canvas was too heavy and pulling down on the lace. So I had to redo the dress. How do I reinforce the lace so that it wasn't sagging when this canvas kind of stiffer material was put on it? Even things like the middle design here and understanding how does this furry purple material sit on the model? How do I make sure that if I'm working with a model maybe who has a little bit of a bigger hip size, that the skirt isn't riding up, and really being able to model fashion virtually. And so this also has a sustainability component to it, which I love, that a lot of times when designers are trying out new designs, they're just experimenting with final cloth. And if it doesn't work out, you're kind of throwing away that cloth or recycling it. But I was able to, and this is actually a direction which the industry is trending in heavily, is that it's more sustainable to model these garments first virtually, see what works and doesn't, before printing out the final pattern and constructing it from there. As I dove more into my classes, I realized that at the time I was living in San Francisco, I'd been in San Francisco for 5 years working for Meta, that if I really wanted to commit to this, I would need to make an even bigger life change. Just knowing that loved San Francisco, but it was not the epicenter of fashion. That was more New York or Los Angeles. And so I decided to take the plunge. I picked up my life, went remote with Meta, and moved to Los Angeles last year, not really knowing too many people, but knowing that I didn't know a lot and that I didn't have any friends or family in the fashion industry. I had so much to learn. And because my program with Parsons is remote, I needed to be around people who were creatives, who did this for a living, that I wanted to immerse myself in another way if I couldn't be there physically for school, and really learn from other people who were doing this full time. And so the images you see here, I moved into LA. I've been really lucky to have a small studio space in my house. And so this is really when a lot of my sketches began coming to life, that I had dedicated time, energy, money, literal space in my house to fashion, that this is something which was no longer just let's see where this goes. We're just gonna do this for personal fulfillment. It was, yes, I'm still doing it for personal fulfillment, but we're really doing this thing. We have committed a huge part of our lives to really doing this thing. And so that is when a lot of my designs finally began coming to life. And so what you can see here are some images of designs I created in my first year as a designer, so last year. And as I previously mentioned, the aesthetic that I was going for is that I really wanted my designs to be something just, you might not see a woman wearing this every day for her daily wear, but it was something special, artistic, over the top that had not been done before. And so I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the label and the brand. And so you can see at the top here, my label's name that I chose was, or is, Jungly, and my little snake logo is in the bottom right here. And as a designer, there's three main places my inspiration comes from. So the first place my inspiration comes from is my experiences and my memories. Every design here, and even some of the ones that will be pictured later, each of them has a story that is maybe a frustration I went through, a struggle I had, a positive memory I had, but there is a story to each of these. The second place from which I draw inspiration is the female form itself. I personally think that one of the most beautiful things in the world is the female form, and just the curves and the edges and the sensuality to the form, and that it was something I knew I wanted to highlight and showcase in my designs. And finally, the third aspect where I draw inspiration from is that an integral part of my identity is being a woman of color in tech and consulting and engineering, and that I wanted to use vibrant colors, white lines, bright white, to really highlight it against deeply melanated skin and kind of have the skin glowing through the designs. So those are the three places I draw inspiration from, and it was directly why I chose the name Jungly for my label. So for those of you who may be South Asian speakers, the word Jungly comes from a Hindi word. And so there's a saying in Hindi I heard growing up a lot, oh, ye jungli ke tane baal kya hai? Which roughly translates to, what are you doing walking around with this jungly or savage looking hair? So a lot of cultural communities have this concept of good hair versus bad hair. And in the South Asian community, hair like mine, kind of curly hair, is not considered the typical beauty standard historically because it doesn't fit the Bollywood beauty standard. And so I have loved that though this word jungly was used in a derogatory way against women historically, in recent years, they see South Asian women have really reclaimed the word to mean, well, what's wrong with being a jungly woman? What's wrong with being wild and free and independent? And yeah, maybe I do want to be a jungly woman. And so this was a word, when I was picking the name for my label, I knew that the designs themselves draw from my experiences, my identity as a woman of color, as an engineer, as all these different things that make me a multi-hyphenate, and the name of my label really needed to reflect that as well. And so as I continued to design more, sketch more, I'd attended a few fashion shows, and I kind of started thinking to myself that I think my designs would look kind of cool on the runway. They don't always really look good on a hanger until you put them on a body and they move with the body. And so I kind of on a whim, I researched some production companies that I knew held spots for emerging designers, for student designers, and just kind of on a whim I applied to see, let's see what kind of reception I get. If I get rejected, that's fine, but I'll ask for feedback, I'll apply again next year, and I'll be a better candidate. And so I applied, and the week after I moved to LA, I actually got a call from a producer saying, we loved your sketches, we loved your designs, we want you on the runway at New York Fashion Week this fall. And so that was almost exactly a year ago, last March, when I got that call. And so now, overnight, I was a Parsons student, still working in big tech as an engineer, but now I was also preparing for a fashion show. And so these are a few outtakes of images, and I'll talk through them in a moment, of just all the many things that suddenly overnight got added to my plate as I accepted their offer. I signed with my current production company to be part of New York Fashion Week last fall. And so I 100% attribute my ability to make it across the finish line and pull off a fashion show due to the skill sets I picked up in consulting, working at Facebook as a program manager, that I essentially last year program managed the production of a fashion show. And so I decided, I wasn't making any money off of this at this point, that I was going to do as much as possible, humanly possible, by myself. And so things like on the left, you can see me designing my logo in Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop. Even the top image here of all the shoe boxes, I began figuring out, okay, well, you can't just put the models on the runway in the clothes. They need to be wearing certain shoes. What kind of shoes do I want them to wear? What kind of accessories? Are they holding anything? I needed a backdrop to run behind the models on the runway. So I was adamant that I think my production company had said, well, we'll do it for you for $1,000. I said, I'll figure it out myself. I'll figure it out myself. So I was now figuring out, how do I get 4K video into Adobe Premiere so that it looks good and high resolution on a 3-story tall screen behind my models. And so that bottom picture there is me in Adobe Premiere trying to figure out how to put together my video backdrop. The picture to the right is me at Mood Fabrics. For anyone who watches Tim Gunn or Project Runway, I'm at Mood Fabrics looking at different textiles, understanding what to source and what to use for my garments. The picture in the middle of me is at my launch party the evening of my show, where I was really lucky and blessed to have over 60 attendees from all over the country fly. A lot of them flew in to attend my show, and I had 140 attendees at the launch party I threw that evening, that I wanted to be able to thank everyone who said, yes, we're going to fly in, we're going to support your launch. And so on top of now planning a fashion show, I was planning a launch party for my friends and family and designing garments not only for myself to wear, but to put on the runway. I had to hire a team. This is a really big area, actually, that I found my corporate skill set coming into play. So the industry standard for doing a model call or hiring a team is that the model will submit their comp card, which is a picture of their face and their body in different angles and then their sizes. That didn't settle well for me of, okay, you're just going to pick women. I get that it's industry standard, but it didn't settle well for me that that was the way I would pick my models. And so even though it is unheard of in the fashion industry, I decided to do interviews for my model casting. So every single model who walked the runway for me, they were required to submit a corporate style application where, yes, they submitted their comp cards and measurements, but I also asked them questions like, what is your educational background? What drives you? What excites you? Why do you resonate with the brand? Who are you as an individual? Because for me, it was important that I knew about the women more than just, okay, she has a beautiful face and a beautiful body, but who is the person behind the face? And so not only did every model go through an application process, I shortlisted, I had about 100 applicants. It was for 5 spots, about 100 applicants. I shortlisted 15 women, and I did 30-minute corporate style interviews with every single person on this short list to, again, get to know, who is this woman? Is she just down to earth, here to have a good time? We're not, we're not doctors saving lives here. I don't want any drama backstage during Fashion Week. That I just want good women who are, they kind of resonate with the brand and they're here to have a good time. And at the time, no one in the industry had done this. I was just starting out as a designer and I wasn't sure how it would go. Now, being a year out from things, I can very confidently say I'm very excited, even though this was another time commitment on top of everything else, that I'm so glad I drew on my corporate background and implemented this, because the team was so harmonious during Fashion Week. All the girls got along really well, and it was just a really positive, supportive environment, very similar to the one that I'd experienced in Phi Rho. And so it was, again, I might have never been in the fashion industry before, but I did things maybe in my own way, a little bit different than folks had done before. But it was, again, another application where it came in handy. Other things that were a big learning experience for me was marketing. This was probably the one area that I had to learn the most in understanding what does it mean to build a personal brand as well as a retail brand, and kind of having that social media presence and identity. So one of the things I'd done, for a few of you who follow me, I'd done a 60-day countdown to New York Fashion Week on my TikTok. I started learning how to put together a more aesthetic looking kind of Instagram profile that showcased my designs still in an artistic way. And this was definitely one of those areas which was a bigger learning experience. But loved experimenting with it, trying out different types of content, which worked well for me. And it was the same thing, which again translated over to putting together my portfolio before a fashion week and also my commission structure. So currently the types of designs I do are all one-of-one, as I mentioned. They're all custom commissions fit to a specific woman, her skin tone, her body, what makes her feel good and feel special. And I realized that once again, my corporate career would help me with this. So when I was in consulting, I was client-facing, I was working with clients every day. And as I was putting together my custom commission structure, I realized that I was able to leverage those skills of what are the things you should always do when working with a client. What can the pitfalls be? When I was putting together my kind of manufacturing process and my garment construction process, my my industrial engineering and supply chain background definitely heavily came into play, and that it helped me think of how do I be efficient? How do I make this process seamless for the client? Where am I sourcing things for them? And again, I would have maybe figured this out had I not done engineering or supply chain, but my background definitely helped facilitate making this easier and just more seamless for myself and for the client. So all of these things were 6 months of work, figuring it out half the time, not knowing who to talk to because all of my peers are mostly engineers or doctors or lawyers, and got to the finish line, got to New York Fashion Week. And so here are the runway snapshots of my 5 models and myself during my designer bow and walk on the runway. And there's not really words that I've still figured out to describe what that day felt like, but it was really kind of something that had been a dream once upon a time that I wasn't sure would ever come to life. It was a waking dream in a lot of ways, that something that had been far off in my imagination was now a reality. And I was seeing 6 months of hard work, a lot of literal blood, sweat, and tears, crying over my sewing machine a lot of nights, of finally getting to see these amazing women walk down the New York Fashion Week runway in my designs. And so all of these women you see here, yes, they're models, they're professional models, but they're also multi-hyphenates. And this was another thing which I looked at during interviews to demonstrate that, yes, you can be a model who walks the runway, but you can be an engineer. Or you can be a journalist, like the woman who's in orange in the bottom left. You can own a record label, like the woman in yellow. You can be a dermatologist, like the woman in purple and white. You can be a flight attendant and a model, like the woman in pink. Or you can be a grade school teacher who went to school for neuropsychology in blue. That the only limitations sometimes that are holding us back are the ones we put on ourselves. That why can't you be a model and a doctor? Why can't you be a model or a designer and an engineer? And so that was something which I heavily looked for in each of my models, that I would have amazing women of color who are multi-hyphenates walk the runway and kind of represent the brand. So the last thing that I would like to end on before opening it up to questions is that if there's one thing I've learned in the last 2 years since starting school, is that if it makes sense to you, it doesn't need to make sense to anyone else. When I started school, when I was accepted to New York Fashion Week, even though my community was supportive, I know that to many people, it didn't make sense to them that an engineer would not only design garments, but she would model her own garments. And now she was going to have models who were also multi-hyphenates walk the runway. That didn't make sense to a lot of people. But even though most days have not been easy juggling this many things, I've learned to just stop explaining my life to most people, that it makes sense to me, it makes me happy. I love this life I've built in LA, designing things in my apartment and just going to school for fashion. It's not maybe the life I would have thought when I was in school in Phi Rho studying industrial engineering, but I'm very thankful that this is a life I've been able to build for myself. And so if there's one thing that each of you take away from this, is that build a life that makes sense to you, even if it doesn't to anyone else. So thank you again for your time this Saturday morning. It's been really a pleasure sharing my journey with all of you. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead. I have one that we had submitted online that we can start with. I think you answered most of the question, but one of them was, how would you approach mid-size and plus-size fashion if you were commissioned for such a project, i.e. would the construction and design be different in any aspects?
Absolutely, I love this question. So going back to kind of the aesthetic of my label, I do focus predominantly on designing for kind of women of color in these kind of brighter jewel tones, a lot of white lines that, again, wanting these more melanated skin tones to show through. And inherently, women of color come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. A lot of us have bigger breasts, bigger hips, we're a little bit curvier. And so that was something from day one I knew that as I was putting together my custom commission structure, is that I wanted, for this reason, to work one-on-one with clients to understand, okay, with your skin tone, what colors do you like yourself in? What tones work with you? I wanted to understand, okay, what parts of your body do you love? Are there parts that maybe you don't want to showcase as much? Maybe if you have bigger breasts or hips, do you need more support in certain areas? Are kind of understanding the ins and outs of that specific woman's bodies, her comfort level, her skin tone, her insecurities, and then being able to work with her and understand, okay, I want to, of course, retain my aesthetic as a designer, but here is how I would take, maybe there is like that pink dress. I know that's one I've used as an example, that it is something which no matter what size you are, if you were heavier chested, it's not going to work for a woman with bigger breasts. And so, okay, maybe we add heavier straps, or we add some underwire, or we adjust the design so there's some kind of diagonal webbing going in, which gives you that lift and cleavage you might want while still retaining the aesthetic of the design. And so that is something which from day one I knew that I want to be able to work with women of all sizes to still retain the same. I want them to feel like my skin is glowing, my body is beautiful, my female form looks amazing, and I feel that kind of female sensuality, that confidence when I'm wearing this out and about. So yeah, that's definitely something which has been part of my kind of commission strategy from day one. Feel free to unmute, jump in with questions. I would love to, whatever's on y'all's mind, would love to answer.
I just want to say thank you. That was a great presentation just at baseline. I'm always impressed by being able to communicate what you love in a way that is not necessarily as technical, but engaging. But so thank you for that. I just wanted your take, because I'm sure you've had hard days. When you're having a hard day doing something you love, how do you get it out of your system without it affecting the next part of your, like, paycheck and job? And then how do you explain that to those you need to explain it to, right? You mentioned not explaining yourself to others, and I do that on a regular basis. I go, okay, and walk away, right? Because I'd rather crochet than hang out with most people, if we're being honest. But with that being said, there are days when the things that I love really interfere with my ability to do what I have to do. And I don't think that's a battle people who are having these almost two parallel careers or two parallel interactions with the world necessarily get a lot of practice in managing.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. So the first part of your question, in terms of how kind of the coping mechanisms or what I do when I have those tough days, there's two things that come to mind. So the first is kind of like you alluded to, getting it out of your system. I have definitely had many days where I'm physically getting it out of my system, where I'll be in front of the sewing machine and I'll just sit there. I might be crying in front of the sewing machine, quite literally, just from stress or frustration. But it definitely feels nice just get it out of your system. And so I have definitely had my fair share. When I say blood, sweat, and tears, heavy on the tears some days. There's sometimes just a nice, good cry is what you need. But I will say the second part is that I am very lucky to, since Phi Rho days, have a really strong community of women. So there's been a lot of phone calls to girlfriends of like, I just need a distraction for 30 minutes. I'm having a bad day. Can we just talk, or can I just vent to you? And I would say that really got me through a lot of tough days when I just needed kind of an outlet. Oh, yeah, Rashmi.
Thanks. I want to say, first of all, there was an excellent presentation. You're really inspiring that you just went for it. And I'm super proud of you. And
Thank you.
I mean, I think it's a great thing that you did. And I am a firm believer that an engineering background equips us to do anything we want to do. And so I think the way you tied everything back was fantastic. I do have a question because, and you've alluded to it, having like the Phi Rho support system, but I know, like when you said you moved to LA and you're going into an industry where you don't have anyone in your life that's kind of doing this, how do you seek out mentors, or how were you able to find mentors in this space that you had never been in before? Because I think that, to me, that would have been a huge hurdle for me. Like, I don't know anyone who does this, and I can research online, but like, how do I just don't know how you connected that. It's amazing.
Yeah, that is probably, and you hit on a really good topic, because that's actually probably the one area I've struggled with and probably continue to struggle with a little bit the most, of finding mentors. And so I would say the way I've approached that one is that I don't think I could say I've found one singular mentor who's my go-to person for all of this, but I tried that in the beginning, that I was really set on, I need a fashion industry mentor who can help me with all these things. And I realized that I would actually maybe need to break it down into components, where I have found mentors who help me with the marketing piece, that they might not be in fashion, but they understand social media. And so they might be in a totally different industry, but I could reapply those principles to what I was trying to do. Or when I was prepping for my fashion show, maybe they hadn't run a fashion show before, but maybe they'd done a theater show, or they did some kind of a show where they could tell you what the craziness backstage looked like. And so I think that was part of it, that accepting I wouldn't maybe find one person who could mentor me on everything, and that it might not necessarily be fashion industry specific, but how could I reapply what I'm learning from certain mentors? And then the other thing was just kind of putting myself out there, where when I moved to LA, I didn't really know anyone. And even though it was scary, I would just go on Eventbrite and look for fashion events, and I would just show up by myself. And I would start talking to people, and there were definitely those people who were like, why are you talking to me? They would kind of give you that look. And I'd be like, great, we will try again. We'll try talking to someone else. That did not feel good, but okay. And this maybe sounds silly, but my go-to opening line would be, I'd like walk up to women and be like, I really love your shoes. Those are super cute. Where'd you get them from? And I don't think I've met a lot of women who are like, I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, thank you. I got them from Target. I got them from here. It's like the best opening line ever. And then, so I kind of figured it out. In the beginning, it felt scary, but it was just putting myself out there. And then when I resonated with people, I realized that maybe they had something I could learn from them. They could learn from me. I would kind of approach it that, hey, I'm prepping for Fashion Week. Are you open to, can I take you to coffee? Can I take you to lunch? Would you be open to sharing with me? And so that's kind of how I approached it. It's not perfect, still kind of working on that one, but just kind of putting myself out there.
I just want to give a third party summary of that. You took an engineer's perspective to a problem, broke it up into pieces, reapplied, and I'm in women in surgery sort of world, and it's called collecting mentors. You should have a collection, because everybody can help you in different aspects.
Yeah.
But you straight up, you engineered yourself a system.
That's a good summary. And I know, Morgan, sorry, you had a second part to your question, which I missed answering, I think. Do you mind repeating the second part to your question?
Yeah, I don't remember. I have the attention
You
span
remember,
of a
Jonah.
squirrel.
Okay. What else can I help answer?
I just want to say I too I'm proud that you're a Phi Rho. Like that um this was amazing. You're an amazing woman. I love the way that you broke the mold and did it your way. And you know, maybe because you didn't have a mentor that was just fashion, you were able to create your own community of models, and you were able to bring in women and bring women together that had similar goals and similar things, just like Phi Rho. And so I'm just so happy. Yeah,
Thank you.
this is wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have to connect you with the UCLA chapter. There's people there
Yeah,
who will listen.
I would love
This would
that.
be
No,
a
and I'm
great
always
talk for them too, right? Just in general, right? Because it is. I grew up in LA, so it can be a scary
okay.
place, right? Especially when you're not from LA. Like you got to know that south of the boulevard is a personality trait, not a geography. Um, and so that, like what you just said about putting yourself out there and knowing that, oh, that didn't feel good, but we're going to keep going and we're going to try. And it's not them, it's not me, it's them. Um, I think that's true in any industry, right? Like, you know, people can be jerks wherever they are. And that sense of competitiveness and having a community like Phi Rho gets you through it. And I have actively tried to recreate it in each aspect of my life because Phi Rho gave me so much of that early on. And just hearing you how thank you guys. Yeah, thank you guys. But hearing how you kind of built that system knowing that it worked for you, right? And like recreating it, I think is so empowering.
Thank you. Hi, Moji.
First of all, I'm just so proud of you. So just wanted to get that out of the way. This is amazing. I have a two-parter. One's kind of a deeper one, one's a lighter one. So first question is, when fashion was just still kind of like an interest and a hobby for you, I'm sure it felt kind of like an alter ego, like it's kind of something that you do on the side, but like you have your tech and business day job. And I'm wondering, like, if you can dive into that a little bit more, like what it looked like to pursue fashion when it was still just like a side hobby that was a little bit of a whisper in your ear.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's different now, but back then, when I think back to 2022, when I was just starting, and like you said, my day job was the main focus, and I had suddenly started to do fashion school. I started with people I trust because, kind of like you mentioned, my entire identity had, up until that point, been around the fact that I'm an engineer, a female engineer who works in tech, and that is something I'm very proud of because in its own way it's breaking the mold. But even for me, I struggled to tell people. I think it took me a year to put it on my LinkedIn even, or like I think I'd posted about it, but it struggled for it to come easily out of my mouth to say that I'm an engineer who's also a fashion designer who models. And there's still days, depending on the company I'm in, where it's something, of course, I'm proud of, but it sometimes takes me a minute where I spent however many 27, 28 years of my life having this identity of being in a technical field as an engineer in big tech. And I think the biggest struggle was for seeing myself differently, that I had this fear of, well, how would other people see me? And I think I focused on that for so long that I didn't realize for a few months that I had to see myself differently first and how much discomfort that was bringing me. And so I think once I started gaining comfort in it's okay to be a multi-hyphenate, you've always had an interest in fashion and now it's a little bit more public, you're doing this fashion school thing. So I think that was really kind of a pivotal moment for me of when I realized that I needed to first gain comfort with seeing myself differently, only then would I gain comfort in other people seeing me differently. And so I think it took me, even when I got accepted to New York Fashion Week, I I still remember I would tell people and they would kind of lean and be like, did I hear that correctly? Like you said it so nonchalantly, like you're going to New York Fashion Week. I'm like, yeah, it's this thing this fall. But I didn't have this comfort level in being loud and proud about it for a long time. And now I am, but I feel like it took 6 months to a year to really be loud and proud and comfortable that I'm a multi-hyphenate in these ways. So did that kind of answer your question?
It does. I love it. Thanks for sharing. And then my easy question, or hopefully easy question, is just how would you describe your personal style? You showed your designs, but like, how do you describe your personal style?
Yeah, so that's a good question, actually. My personal style is actually very much, I know you can't see my full outfit right now, but I'm actually more of a simple day-to-day. Like I love my accessories, so you can see my nails and my jewelry. I've got my little snake ring on, but I feel like I dress a little bit more how I would. Like this is something I would wear to work, this with a pair of jeans. It's a very tech outfit. So compared to the rest of the tech industry, I probably like to dress up more. I love my heels. So I'm an accessories girl. I love my cute purses and heels. But I'm very much like I'm wearing a denim skirt right now with just this kind of mock neck situation that I like. I still do like bright colors, but I'm a bright, solid colors, kind of simple gal. Like I'll do a white t-shirt and dark jeans any day with the kind of stilettos thrown underneath. So that's kind of my go-to. I do, if anyone's gone to dinner with me, I'm definitely more of a shows up overdressed for the party in the evenings, but on a day-to-day, I feel like my tech outfit is my go-to since that's still a really big part of my identity. What other questions can I help answer? And if anyone's not comfortable jumping in right now with questions, feel free to hit me up via like LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm always happy to chat and answer questions via those avenues too.
You want to plug your social media real quick?
Yes. So I did not have it on a slide. I think it's in the invite, but it's my, if anyone wants to follow on Instagram or TikTok as well, it's just Jungly Official. So it's JNGLI Official. And then my personal handle, it should also be in the invite. It's Somi G, SOMIGEE. I'll send them both in the chat actually. If anyone would like to follow, you're welcome to see. I guess the one last thing I'll maybe plug, because I did not include it earlier, is that I was invited back to New York Fashion Week this fall, and so I will have my designs on the runway again in New York this September. So it's not publicly posted yet, but I not only will have my designs on the runway, I'm also hiring for a fashion business intern this summer. So if you all know anyone who's interested in kind of the business side of the house with fashion, I'll be hiring an intern. They'll be joining me at Fashion Week this fall as part of the team. And I would love to see some of you there if that's of interest.